If you find the content relevant, then do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also hit the bell button to get a regular notification. Also do share your experiences and any suggestions that you have in the comment box. Hope you enjoyed. Hi Rohit. So today we have Rohit with us, who is a chartered accountant. He gave CAT score a 99.22 percentile. He also went for the interviews, including all IIMs apart from B, C, and I. He converted all his IIM calls, and he is going to join IIM Ahmedabad. So let's look at understand from him how did he go about preparing for the PI and the VAT stage, right? So hi Rohit, how do you feel getting into Ahmedabad?
Oh, yeah, I was a little relieved, and now I'm sort of looking forward to what IIM has to offer. So hopefully the college life will be good.
So can you run us through the journey of how did you prepare for PI and VAT for the interviews?
So I figured, when this course came out, I figured that I had a decent chance of getting a decent call. So I started preparing for my PI. So what I did initially was to cover my bases. That's basically know about myself, introspect, figure out why I'm doing something, doing what I'm doing, what I'm doing at work, things like that, my strengths, weaknesses, all of those things. So I figured that first. Then second, I went on to my background. So considering I was a CA, I covered whatever basics there were there, and let's say whether it came to finance, accounts and some other subjects. So I went through all of them, and then economics. I did quite a bit of economics as well. So that's sort of basically that's the base I sort of covered, and then from then I sort of built on to how one needs to approach. Let's say what I did was, I was already reading my newspapers and stuff, so current affairs wasn't too much of a problem. But especially for preparing for VAT, I sort of started, picking out for data that I could use everywhere. So whether it was, let's say, some education data, you know, broad data that can be fit into places. So that's basically how I sort of went about it.
So fine. So let us
GDPI.
divide your preparation to VAT and PI. So how did you go about preparing for the VAT?
So first, Ahmedabad has a completely different sort of way of batch. So it's called analytical writing test, which is sort of very similar to GMAT, where you need to figure out whether a certain statement strengthens the argument. Whether it's a strong argument, what can strengthen it, what can weaken it. So then I sort of went through the GMAT website and figured out how people sort of answer those questions. And so once I figured that base out, this very structure of it, then I went about solving some VATs, and just to have an understanding, saying that since VAT is too unpredictable, anything can be thrown at you. So I figured that on a large basis, whether I could figure out most of my VAT answer, I come up with some decent solution for most of my VAT answers. And then once that got over, for the other IIMs, there was more like an essay sort of structure. So I started writing a couple of them, and eventually I sort of got used to it, because it's been a while since all of us have given like an essay before. So once I got used to that, then I sort of started improvising, saying where I could make improvements, whether there could be some sort of good introduction, saying whatever sort of made sense with how I would usually approach something. So some people go for something like a quote or some extract of a book. So some things like that, what really suited me, I figured those things out, and then come up with some data. So data was something that I really look forward to. Something like, let's say, a data on education, saying X amount of people aren't as educated as they'd want to be, and thus this is some data where you can put it into something like an economic development article as well, something that's to do with children and education as well. So the broad-based data which you can sort of fit into multiple areas. So that's sort of broadly how I went.
So you had a lot of data in your VAT? When you wrote the VAT for the IIMs, did you put in a lot of data?
No, actually, so the Ahmedabad one was completely different. I think more ethics based, so there wasn't too much room for data. But nonetheless, when you read data, you sort of read the nuances behind it, so it's still pretty helpful.
And for the other IIMs, did you use data out there?
So So there was one to do with so Lucknow didn't. I mean, by the time there was already COVID-19, so I had my VAT cancelled. So the only other one was a common admission process, and the one at Kozhikode. So there the data didn't help, but I used to read books. So reading books really helped there. So you could pick up some articles, some extracts in the book. Most of what I read was non-fiction, so it was really easy to put those into the answers. So that sort of helped, but not too much data. I think a couple of data regarding voting data and something I had read, which sort of applied because they asked for universal voting in the common admission.
So what kind of books did you read that you feel helped you in your VAT?
Uh, Built to Last was one book that I read. Considering, I mean, it's sort of like a management book. I mean, it's to do with companies and such. So you sort of gain perspective on that. So and there, it's sort of just to put it in context, in Kozhikode they asked me uh, whether if any vaccines developed, should the patents be shared or should they be registered. So there was a company research on Johnson and Johnson, how they said that their main purpose is to serve the people rather than make money. So that really, I sort of fit that into this. And so that was one book that really helped me. And considering my background, I was I was reading a book called The Price, which is basically how the oil how oils come to be, right from when it was discovered first to how it is today. So that was really important to my interview, and to an extent, I hoped it came to that as well.
Book on oil you read because you're working in BPCL and that linked to your interview, is it?
I mean, but since I was working in BPCL, I was already interested in how crude actually developed and how it's come about to this stage. So I was actually interested in it, and suddenly, I mean, it just so happened that I actually came across that book. So I figured I might as well pick it up because I mean, it's going to help someday. So I picked it up and
Okay. So coming to an interview stage. So what do you think the interviewers look out for when they interview you?
So based on the experience that I had, so I think majorly they're looking for two things. One is whether you can apply what you've learned in real scenarios or in, let's say, case studies or examples that they might give. So the fact that what you've learned, whether you can apply it to the real world or not. So that is one thing that they sort of look for. And in most of my interviews, what they did was, so they used to test you on your substance basically, but it used to so happen that the level up, I mean, it keeps going a level up, and eventually you're meant to reach a point where you sort of don't know you sort of don't know the answer to it. And that's when they sort of test you on your metal, really, I mean, on your mental ability, on whether how you're able to deal with that situation. So if I were to, and I've had quite a few of interactions with people who have been panelists, whether they're ex-professors or alums from them who are part of the panel. And that's what everybody who's told me is, one, for whether you can conduct yourself properly, and second, based on your depth and your width of knowledge in terms of the practical applicability.
So can you run us through maybe a couple of interviews that you faced? Any of the IIM that you faced, which you want to run through it?
So the IIM A interview was a little tricky. So I mean, at first, so when I got in, so they asked me about how BPCL was doing, and considering BPCL, I mean, still is in the process of privatization, it's sort of the go-to place. So there are a couple of questions on that. Then they sort of asked me saying, okay, so which other companies there in, let's say, this particular business segment? They asked me which other companies there in the LPG business segment. I mean, I wasn't from LPG, but then, when you're doing it, you need to sort of figure all these things out. So luckily, I was able to answer that. And then came a really tricky question on auction. I mean, considering it's a public sector undertaking, so there are a lot of auction blocks. I mean, considering it's a crude. So he came up with this really unique and challenging sort of question, which basically said that there are some X amount of bid. I think there are 8 more bidders than you are, and you know that the value of the block that is being auctioned is 100, and the other bidders are somewhere ranging from 0 to 200. So, and you want to get the auction. So, what is the price at which you're going to bid, where you maximize your potential, maximize your probability to get that auction, and at the same time maximize the benefit to the company as well. So that's the question that he threw at me. I mean, so then I started solving it. I mean, I figured it's a tough one, so at least you sort of at least make an attempt to start solving things. So I sort of wrote down the answers and then figured how logic worked. I somehow tried to fit maxima, minima into it, and LPP as well. Somewhere I tried to fix that in. So, and he wanted really specific answer, and I was trying to put things into paper, and then he sort of, they're sort of saying that I could not do it and it's too hard for me and I should probably let it go and things like that. So, and then I sort of went on about it. I sort of didn't give the exact answer. I think the exact answer was 100. So I gave the answer saying a little about 100. I said something like 101. So, and then I later went on and Google is this, it's this, as this case study on something called a Vickery auction, where, and I think sorry, there's one addition to this. The blog gets awarded to the highest bidder, but at the price of the second highest bidder.
Okay.
So that was the question. So that was the tricky part of the question. So it's something called Vickery auction. So I couldn't get that right, but I think the way that I sort of went about it sort of helped me a little bit in the interview.
Great.
So that was the fun. Yeah.
Any tips for preparation for the students?
So one is to not do an overkill. So that's what at least I followed, saying not to do an overkill. So at least be yourself. I mean, whatever works for you is good enough to sort of get through. So not try to pretend something that you're not. And the second is to cover all your bases. I mean, the very fundamentals of things, because there's nothing more embarrassing than not knowing something what you're supposed to know. So I think that pretty much covers the basics of it. One is to be, not to do an overkill, just take it as any other conversation and try to sort of make a conversation rather than make it sort of an interrogation. So, and to cover your bases. So.
Okay, just wanted to add, how are the other interviews different from Ahmedabad? So you described your Ahmedabad interviews. How was maybe the Lucknow or the Kozhikode interview different from the IIM interview, Ahmedabad interview?
So I didn't quite know this until I sort of went for the Kozhikode interview. But I think Kozhikode is known for sort of putting some pressure or trying to put some pressure on the candidates. So everyone that came aside and are talking to others, they're saying that they're trying to stress me out. They're asking me random stuff and things like that. But when I went to the interview, the very first question they asked me was whether I was stressed. I said I wasn't. I wasn't stressed. And then they started asking me a couple of questions that they meant to sort of throw you off guard. So, but once I got that right, they sort of the tone of them they sort of gentled into a normal sort of conversation. And it's one of the better. Probably one of the best interviews that I had, because it went out so smoothly after that. So I think what's really important is they do try to catch you off guard, but as long as you sort of hold on to your ground, then you can sort of do it really well.
Okay. What do you think one thing that brought you closer to your dream?
So one thing that sort of brought me close to this thing was one, since I was since something like an interview is so qualitative, so you can't really sort of ask people for too much feedback, because then because you can't incorporate all of them, because there's not right and wrong in this. So there was this one discussion I had with an ex-professor of IIM Bangalore. So I sort of asked them that, what's your take off and what do you sort of look for in the candidates? Why do you ask, let's say, this question, or why do you go for this question? And what feedback do you have for me? So one thing that he really stressed upon was to not have an overkill. So not do an overkill, just to be yourself. Don't try too hard to impress, or don't try too hard to display as if you know things, know too many things about. So that sort of really helped me. So that's one advice I really sort of took on, saying is to not do an overkill. And in many ways, it's probably the easiest advice to take, because then you sort of can do on with how you normally go about things, and that sort of worked out.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Rohit. Thanks for giving your time for, giving the interview. I'm sure your experiences will help everyone. Yeah. Thanks for being there, and all the best for your Ahmedabad journey.